to the Up and Under podcast, the show dedicated to the true basketball fans, giving you unfiltered and intellectual takes on the game we all love. If you like what you hear, consider subscribing to the show on everywhere you can find a podcast. Basically, you can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and wherever you can get a podcast. I'm your host Hani. Joins me as always at Zeeshan.
Yo.
All right, man. We are within the NBA Finals now. Believe it or not, it is June. Crazy. And yeah, we're 2 games into the NBA Finals. The NBA season is basically at its end, but of course it's the NBA, so we never have any shortage of news. You know, we've had massive news over the last week or so. So if you also haven't even checked out, we have been uploading some clips and some breaking news, some of our thoughts. We've been uploading them on YouTube and on our Instagram. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so. But I mean, for the most part, the playoffs have been pretty exciting. Things have been kind of moving as we expected, and now we have a pretty fun finals, I think. You know, nobody expected to see the Denver Nuggets and the Miami Heat in the NBA Finals, and so far the series has delivered, in my opinion.
Yeah, man, it's been a good series. Obviously, it's not like the most hyped up series, but I think it's still been a pretty good series thus far. I don't think it's gonna be a long series, still in my opinion, but you know, you never know. This season has been like really interesting, really unpredictable, and these playoffs have been no different.
Yeah, and if you want Zeeshan's full thoughts on his predictions, definitely check out a clip on that where it's definitely controversial if you disagree.
Yeah, some people got mad at me. I said I don't care, bro.
Well, I mean, that's to be expected. But since we're now in the NBA Finals, and since we've been obviously, breaking down the what's next series for some of the eliminated teams, we have to obviously talk about the 2 teams that were eliminated in the conference finals. And those 2 teams are the Boston Celtics and the Los Angeles Lakers. Both teams had championship level aspirations. Both teams honestly were expected to win and expected to be in the NBA Finals, especially considering they're both historic franchises. From a rating standpoint, I think the NBA would have wanted to see these 2 franchises kind of square off in, sort of like a classic matchup and whatnot. But both teams ultimately fell short of their goals. I mean, the Boston Celtics, down 3-0-3, they had to come back, force a game 7, and they ended up losing on home court. And then the Los Angeles Lakers, they ended up getting swept by the Denver Nuggets. Both teams have a lot of questions heading into this offseason, and we're going to have to answer what's next for the Boston Celtics and the Los Angeles Lakers. So let's start off with the Boston Celtics. Now, as a Raptor fan, this brings me a lot of joy to see the Boston Celtics struggle and have a lot of questions about their future, because it's been a little unfair, if I have to admit. The fact is that they have 2 stud players on their team. They've had a great roster, a great sort of culture and all that stuff, but they don't have a championship since 2008, which we happen to have one. Just throwing that out there, just to obviously start the shade off. But to keep things real, the Boston Celtics, they were a really good team this past season. They finished with a 57-25 record. They were second in the Eastern Conference, and they were first in the East and the NBA for like a good chunk of the season. Like, it wasn't until like after the All-Star break until like that's when like Milwaukee and stuff started to surpass them. But again, from the numbers standpoint, it's hard to find flaws with this Boston Celtics team. Second in offensive rating, third in defensive rating. That's usually a sign that this is a championship level team right there. They were first in net rating. If you go into individual stats, they were 4th in points per game. They were 6th in 3-point percentage, 4th in 2-point percentage, 14th in field goal percentage, and 5th in opponents' points per game. They had the numbers all point to a really strong season. They were a good team on both ends of the floor. And this is especially true after coming off of their finals appearance last season, where, everyone was kind of expecting with the coaching turnover and all the drama facing Boston. We didn't expect Boston to just pick up exactly where they left off and hit the ground running.
Well, I mean, to be fair, you mentioned that they were contending numbers. I mean, they were a contender. It's not like they didn't end up being a contender. They got to a conference finals, which is pretty damn close to being a NBA finals contender. So I don't think the numbers necessarily lied. I think you'll get into it, but I think the main difference in the playoffs a lot of times is the small adjustments that coaches make. And obviously we know Eric Spoelstra is one of the greatest coaches in NBA history, without a doubt, at this point. And it really showed against a rookie coach in Joe Mazzulla, who to be fair to Joe Mazzulla, shouldn't have been in that position in the first place.
Yeah, and
Shout out Ime Udoka, man.
shout out Ime, bro. He's stealing three. He's stealing staff, bro. He's already like, yo, my guys, reach Houston. But again, like you said, the regular season is different from the postseason. But in the regular season themselves, they've had two stud players, as I mentioned earlier, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, had All NBA, All Star seasons. Um, they were great, and the Celtics also got a great contribution from off their bench. I mean, they got Derek White played amazing. He got an All Defensive nod as well. Malcolm Brogdon, Sixth Man of the Year, again, fantastic pickup, very under the radar addition. In our we really covered it. We really like that addition from the Celtics. Al Horford again loves playing in Boston. Clearly, he had a great season. Grant Williams played solid. On top of, among other players on the Celtics, but ultimately, the Celtics, although they made it to the conference finals, the playoffs is a different animal, and I think it's great from just looking at it from from a wide lens, seeing that okay, they made it to a conference finals. That's great, but when you start digging in, it wasn't necessarily a smooth ride for the Celtics to get there. Let's start off in the first round where they had to play the Atlanta Hawks. You would think a 2 seed would beat a 7 seed as a foregone conclusion. Not the case. Boston obviously going up 2-0. They drop a game 3 in Atlanta, win the game 4 in Atlanta, then drop the game 5 in Boston at home, then ended up having to win in game 6. So they obviously gave up 2 games to the Hawks in that one. In the second round, they had a competitive back and forth series with the Philadelphia 76ers, where they were even down 3-2 and had to climb back in order to force a game 7 in Boston, and where they ultimately showed up and won that. And then finally in the conference finals, where they were playing up against a scrappy underdog Miami Heat team that has been literally tearing through teams left, right, and center. They went down 0-3 in the conference finals, had to fight their way back again, claw their way back to a game 7, only to get blown out on their home court. And, to be honest with you, I understand. I'll save Boston fans the trouble, and I'll just say, I know Jason Tatum tweaked his ankle at the beginning of Game 7, but he still played the remainder of the game, and that doesn't excuse the fact that Jaylen Brown wasn't very good. Derek White was actually pretty good.
Derek White was the only one who really
Derek White
showed
was the
up.
only one who showed up, but everybody else on the team just couldn't get anything going, and they got blown out. Miami outworked them. Eric Spoelstra outcoached Joe Mazzulla. And again, I think one thing I noticed just looking at the numbers from each series, the effectiveness of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum dropped significantly each series. Like Jaylen Brown in particular was shooting like 50% from the field, 50% from 3 in the first series. That dropped a little bit, and then when we got to the Miami series, Jaylen Brown, couldn't hit a shot in the ocean or something.
Well,
like that.
I'll give him a tiny bit of I'll cut him a tiny bit of slack just because he obviously had the wrist injury. But to be fair, this has been a recurring issue with Jaylen Brown in particular. Jason Tatum, he's kind of one of those guys that's super high when he's high and then super low when he's low. But you can see that the team runs where Jason Tatum runs. He is their best player by far. Jaylen Brown, unfortunately, as a second guy, has not shown up occasionally, and really in key moments has not been able to show up.
Especially this season with the turnovers. The turnovers were very apparent because Jaylen Brown tried to take on more on-ball responsibilities, especially in that Game 7 where he had to because Tatum was hurt, and the handle just was
8
not
turnovers.
there. 8 turnovers in a Game 7 where they got blown out.
When the entire game plan for the defense is just force you left and live with the result, that's not really a good thing for you as a star.
Yeah, and again, there were games where Derek White outplayed Jaylen Brown in these playoffs. So, yeah, I would say the effectiveness of those 2 stars definitely played a factor into results. And then I think finally the Celtics' lack of depth was really exposed. Again, especially where Time Lord was hurt, and besides no one else besides Derek White and Grant Williams really couldn't really bring you anything off the bench. So no one else really brought anything to the table. So, and we already talked about Joe Mazzulla getting outcoached and a little overwhelmed in my opinion. But yeah, so that was the Boston Celtics season and postseason, bringing us into their notable free agents heading into this offseason. First and foremost, Grant Williams is an unrestricted free agent. Obviously, he's been a key piece for them. Will they bring him back? I think will be dependent upon the number that he's asking for, and also how the next point I'll bring up, which is the Jaylen Brown situation, kind of plays out. Because Jaylen Brown is extension eligible now because he made All NBA. He's eligible to be signed to the Supermax deal. Which why is that still in the CBA?
The players wanted it for sure. That's why. That's why it's still in the CBA.
Yeah, but now there's a double, basically a double hard tax now on the salary cap. So that's gonna be fun. But basically, Jaylen Brown is eligible to sign a 5-year, $295 million extension with the Celtics, which basically, in terms of annual value, by the end of that contract, he'd be making about $66 million a season. That's pretty expensive, and especially considering the fact that, as I just mentioned, the new CBA rules are going to be kicking in, where now if you're in that second threshold of taxpayers, you won't be eligible for some of these exceptions that other teams teams like Boston benefits off of. So that's one thing to consider. Danilo Gallinari, the player option, he's basically picking it up if he hasn't already, because of the injury, which was unfortunate to him. Peyton Pritchard has the team option. This guy's been demanding a trade for what feels like 3 years now. Okay, it is what it is for Peyton Pritchard. Mike Muscala, team option. I mean, he didn't really bring much to you. You can bring him back, not bring him back. It really doesn't matter. And Blake Griffin is an unrestricted free agent. He's probably gone somewhere else, or maybe retires. Who knows? But which brings us into the Celtics' needs heading into the offseason and next season in particular. And first and foremost, you have to figure out the Jaylen Brown situation. And this is where a lot of debate has kind of come to fruition with the Boston Celtics, is that what do you do with Jaylen Brown? Do you offer him that $295 million deal and just live with the results? Because, again, Tatum would also be extension eligible next season. So he's eligible for $318 million. So if you have two guys making making $600 million,
that's crazy.
That's a lot. Like, both these guys, if they signed their extensions, they'd be worth about 70% of the cap. That's how much they'd be eating up. Is it worth it? Like, is it worth it to lock in this core group of guys and, ride them out in the future? For me personally, I don't think it's worth paying Jaylen Brown $295 million. I think he might be worth somewhere around the 230, maybe 220 range. But $295 is a lot to give a guy who, to be honest with you, still has something to prove in terms of his performance, especially in the postseason. So that's the first thing. And then obviously, do you trade him? If he's not willing to sign for anything less than that Supermax, do you explore trade options? Do you maybe break up the core of Tatum and Brown? You might have to explore those options. But that's something you have to figure out. Re-sign him or trade him, because that'll dictate the future of the team. The second thing I would say the Boston Celtics need to explore is they need to explore trade options for Marcus Smart. Now, I mentioned the cap concerns, especially with the salary cap and the CBA kind of, changing things for the Celtics and the roster construction. So they need to free up some money in some capacity. And I feel like Marcus Smart seems like the guy who should go. Malcolm Brogdon proved his value. Derek White has proved his value. Those two guys are signed for another 2 seasons. So those guys, I would say to hold on to them. The question then remains with Marcus Smart. What do you do with him? He's making about $18, $19 million a season. He's a one-sided, sometimes a useful player on the offensive end, but for the most part, he's a defensive guy. I'd say maybe explore a trade for him. And I think the core also needs to change for this team. They need some sort of shakeout. And if you're not going to break up Tatum and Brown, trading away Marcus Smart might not be a bad option. And I just talked about it, but freeing up money has to be a priority, especially with Tatum and Brown's extension. That's just a no-brainer. And I think the last thing they need to do is they need to acquire some more depth pieces. The playoffs really exposed that the Celtics lacked some additional depth, especially with how good their starters kind of were able to do. They need guys off their bench. I think in particular they need a backup guards, and they need another wing or two to add to their team. But that's what I think the Boston Celtics need. Obviously, bringing us into their draft situation, the Celtics don't have a first rounder, but they do have Portland's second round pick. They have the 35th overall pick in the draft. That might not be a bad pick. It might be an under the radar pick. The Celtics might even be able to use it as trade bait, because again, this was the year of trading second round picks. like currency.
Yep.
So who knows? Another second round pick might be traded at the draft. But yeah, draft doesn't really apply much to the Celtics. Finally, bringing us into the potential moves on what I think the Celtics should do. And this was a tough one, but I think it comes down to, for me with Jaylen Brown, it's two things: either re-sign him for a cheaper number, like it can't be 295. You have to meet somewhere in the middle, or you try to trade him. And the only player that I think, the only opportunity that I see for a trade that'll benefit both sides is with Portland and trading for Damian Lillard. Obviously, Portland has the number 3 overall pick. They're fielding offers for that pick in order to trade, in order to make their team better for Damian Lillard. But it might not be a bad option to trade and acquire a young star like Jaylen Brown, who you can pay. You have the cap space if you trade Lillard, and then draft a guy like Scoot Henderson, and then you have Henderson and Brown as your 1-2 in Portland. That should be not a bad option. And then on the flip side, trading Jaylen Brown to Boston, pairing him with Tatum would actually be a pretty lethal offensive combination.
Damian Lillard, you mean?
Sorry, Damian Lillard to Boston would be a very lethal combination. But that's the only alternative that I can see. Otherwise, re-signing him makes the most amount of sense because it's hard to get good players. That's just a fact. I'd also say to re-sign Grant Williams. I'm hoping this guy is a team guy and he'll take a team-friendly deal. But I would say again, it's hard to get. He's a solid depth, a solid rotation player. So re-signing him, I think, makes sense. I mentioned it earlier, but trading Marcus Smart, I think they have to trade him. I think Marcus Smart will still be able to yield you some value. And I think if you flip Marcus Smart for some depth pieces, like, again, for some cheaper depth, I think that'll benefit Boston more in their championship run than keeping Marcus Smart and his single cap hit. Trade Peyton Pritchard, please. Like, this guy's been begging for a trade. He thinks he deserves a bigger role, so just get rid of him at this point. Although he looks like a dude from Boston, so I don't know. It just fit for him to be on that team. He's also just annoying like a Boston dude. So I don't know. Flip him at this point. Maybe get a second round pick for him. So it might happen. But yeah, so those were the sort of the trades and those type of moves. In terms of free agents who I think Boston should try to go after, like I said, they need some wing depth and stuff. So I think if you can get a guy like Harrison Barnes to come on maybe for a mid-level deal for a championship run, that might not be a bad idea. Jordan Clarkson, like I said, a great bench guy to have, bench scorer. Josh Okogie, I think, would be very interesting with Boston. I think, again, he improved his offensive game a little bit with Phoenix, but his defense is very valuable, and it would be very good for a Boston Celtics team. In terms of some guard depth, you can go with Kobe White, who, in all honesty, is probably done in Chicago. Maybe getting him into a newer situation with Boston might help him to recapture his game. Dante DiVincenzo had a up and down year with the Golden State Warriors, but I think putting him into Boston situation might help him as well. He ended his tenure with Golden State actually a lot better than he started, so take that for what you will. Obviously, the guy who we're putting in every single one of these because he literally fits every team is Mason Plumlee, because why not? He fits every team. He knows his role, and again, I mean, it'd be kind of cool to see a Plumlee with the ring. And finally, I threw in Dean Wade just because, again, floor spacing, he's a solid rotation guy, and he'd probably be pretty cheap to acquire. But overall, I mean, the Boston Celtics, their future is, although their long-term future is hard to predict, in the short term, if they can kind of, make the small tweaks to their roster, they could be right back in contention next season. Like, they're not that far off. They need a few things, obviously, to shore up some of their weak points. And obviously Missoula getting more experience. But other than that, I mean, the Celtics should be okay, for at least for the next year, for next season. Beyond that, we'll have to wait and see what these contract extensions and what the new CBA is going to look like.
Yeah, I think the time is now for the Boston Celtics. Like, you have to get it done right now if you're the Boston Celtics. And in regards to the Jaylen Brown situation, I think this is what the NBA kind of wants at this point with the supermax contracts and the large contracts. If you're going to give this much money to players, there has to be some sort of counterbalance to that. And I think the NBA, with the new CBA rules in place, is essentially saying, hey, teams have a limited amount of years, and then talent is going to move around the league. And that's going to essentially prop up the excitement around the league in an era that won't have a guy like LeBron James or a Michael Jordan who can, be the sole spotlight of the league.
Bro, that's gonna be scary when LeBron eventually.
It's gonna be
retires.
crazy, man. It's gonna be crazy. It's
So
gonna feel like
weird.
what I guess people when MJ retired. That's what people
It's
felt
so
like.
weird.
Yeah. Moving on to their Western Conference rivals, the Los Angeles Lakers. They finished 43-39, good for 7th in the Western Conference. They had a 20th ranked offensive rating and 11th in defensive rating. But basically, much of their stats can essentially be discounted because they came back with a completely new team after the trade deadline. The most relevant stats from that post-trade deadline team is that they finished with a 26-12 record after the trade deadline, completing one of the craziest turnarounds in NBA history
But they had a new team.
after starting 2-10.
Like I'll say this about the Lakers, and I've been saying it all along. A lot of people saying, "Oh, you see the Lakers, we knew they were good and all. It was just Westbrook." No, it wasn't just Westbrook. It was a bad team. Pelinka messed up. He had a poorly constructed roster, which he had to go and fix at the deadline, which is not a it's not necessarily a good strategy for winning. It just happened to work out for him. So, take that as you will. So, it's a new team from the Lakers.
And they also had the best defense in the league during that span. They kept that up going into the playoffs. Or I think they had the second best defense in the playoffs. I think the Denver Nuggets had the best defense at some point. But yeah, the Lakers turned themselves into a defensive team firstly.
Well, because
and-
AD stayed relatively healthier near the
Exactly.
end of the season.
And despite a terrible majority of the season, and despite the fact that they did get swept in the Western Conference Finals, I think the Lakers have decently good vibes going into this offseason. I think much better vibes than, let's say, a Boston Celtics team that really kind of fell short of expectations and did not play up to their potential. Whereas the Lakers in the conference finals, I mean, they played pretty damn good. It's just the Denver Nuggets are really, really good, and they showed that. Every game was decided by like a couple points, essentially. And, I mean, Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, they played out of their mind. Denver as a whole, I think everyone just recognized that the Denver Nuggets are probably the best Western Conference team of the last, I don't know, X number of years.
Well, the thing is, I'll say this is like Denver. Yes, I'm not taking anything away. Denver's a very good team, deserve to win. I said they deserve to beat the Lakers. But if you're a LeBron-led team and you got swept, like when I look at LeBron, I think it has to be championship or bust. And the fact of the matter, or at least the finals are bust. And the fact that they couldn't even win a game in the conference finals, it was pretty concerning for me.
I mean, to be fair, like LeBron had the injury. AD, I think, is the main problem. For as much good that we talk about AD, he has his downside, similar to a guy like Jason Tatum.
Trade him.
Yeah,
It's time.
it's. I'll get into that a bit later, but I think their vibes are not as bad as like what they were during the middle of the season.
It could have been worse. It could
when
have
they
been a lot
had
worse.
the Westbrook team. But they do have a good amount of questions going into this offseason. I think the biggest one being what the LeBron James situation is. Now, obviously, you talked about retirement. It's not going to happen until Bronny comes into the league. Now, whether Bronny actually wants to play with him or not is a different question. But I think he'll stick around at least until like Bronny comes into the league.
That'd be it's kind of a slick move by LeBron. He's putting it in the media that like, yo, if my son wants to or not, kind of guilt tripping him into it. Like I see you, LeBron. I see what you're trying to pull right here.
I mean, listen.
How's Bronny supposed to say no to that?
Bronny, like, if I'm like, you gotta do it, man. That's like a legendary.
It's
moment.
a historic thing.
It's crazy moment. You never would have thought.
Even for like a season.
You saw it in baseball, but like other sports, that doesn't happen. Yeah. So, the NBA having that or basketball having that would be absolutely insane.
Mostly because nobody else will be able to do it ever. Because
LeBron, exactly.
There's not going to be another LeBron.
Doing it. Yeah. In terms of their notable free agents, essentially their whole team besides LeBron and AD. So D'Angelo Russell is a free agent. Malik Beasley's on a $16 million team option. That's definitely getting declined for sure. Mo Bamba is on a non-guaranteed deal of, I think, $10 million. Lonnie Walker IV is a unrestricted free agent. Rui Hachimura and Austin Reeves, two of their big free agents, are restricted.
Damn, they're RFAs.
Yeah.
That's
Jared
sick.
Vanderbilt is on a non-guaranteed deal, which I think, in all honesty, will probably be picked up. Wenyen Gabriel and Troy Brown Jr. are unrestricted free agents. And Dennis Schroeder is also an unrestricted free agent after he basically outplayed his mid-level deal this past season. In terms of their team needs, I think it starts obviously with Austin Reeves. You have to re-sign Austin Reeves. That's the main priority.
Yo,
This
you gotta
guy's
keep him,
easily
bro.
this guy's easily getting like 100 mil, I think.
Bro, he's insane. This guy solo. There were games in the semifinals, the conference finals. Bro, this man just came in, everything, bro. Threes. Man was hustling on defense. This guy's like he's the definition of a hardworking player. And the Lakers always like the last time the Lakers had a white guy who can do that, bro. They won a championship.
I mean, credit. The one thing that stayed consistent with the Lakers over these past 10 years has been their scouting. Their scouting has been really, really good over the past decade, despite everything else. So, yeah, like I think their first priority is obviously re-signing Austin Reeves, whatever it takes. And
Yeah,
then
you can't let him go like Alex Caruso. You can't do that again.
they're definitely not going to repeat the same mistake again.
Good news
And
is
then
he's RFA.
I think you have to try at least get one of Rui Hachimura then Schroeder back. Now it will be very, very tough to get both of them back, especially I think Rui Hachimura is the tough one because of the fact that a team will throw a decent amount of money at him. And this Lakers stint was a godsend for him because he was not getting this money in Washington for sure.
Because Washington doesn't know what they're doing. Like I read something today where Washington said eventually they'll blow it up. When the hell is eventually? Like the Wizards are a mess. So and they traded him for what? Kendrick Nunn in 2 seconds?
Yeah.
Which is like wow, what a steal for the Lakers to get that done.
D'Angelo Russell, the Lakers have talked about wanting him back. At this point, I think the only way you get him back is if you can get him for cheap. And I think in that case, like he would probably take maybe a 1-year prove it kind of deal. I think that's the only way it'll happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's the only way you re-sign him. Otherwise, if he asks even a little bit of money, I am not doing that.
Unless the Lakers try to go after a certain somebody who just so happened to got available today.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later.
Another thing I think they need, and this really got exposed in the Denver series, is they need a center who can soak up the minutes with AD not being on the court.
I swear they've been saying this for years, like basically since Dwight
Howard and JaVale McGee. That's essentially what won them. That was a big part of them winning the series against Denver the last time. Is that Dwight Howard especially did a number on Nikola Jokic. He really battled Nikola Jokic well, and they were clearly missing that presence, especially with AD now being a full-time center. They really need a guy, another big guy who can soak up those minutes next to Anthony Davis.
Should they try bringing him back? Why not? Dwight's recruiting for the all Taiwan team, bro.
Yeah, why not? Why not bring him back? They need more shooting. That was a big struggle for the Lakers throughout the series, throughout the season. That didn't really change after the trade deadline. Now, they definitely did get a lot better after a trade deadline, but that was still a struggle for them post-trade deadline. Their main shooter that they got in Malik Beasley turned out to be pretty unplayable, which, was bound to happen. He started off great, but obviously it's Malik Beasley, so, They need more shooting, especially next to LeBron James. Especially when LeBron wasn't shooting well. Mainly, I think he couldn't really get the lift that he wanted anymore. And AD has not been a shooter since 2020. So I think you need some more shooting around them. You would ideally want some wing defense. Jared Vanderbilt's been really good on that end of the court. But maybe like some more insurance in terms of that wing defense. You can't have... LeBron was great defensively in the playoffs, but, it clearly took a huge toll on him at this stage of his career.
LeBron wasn't himself in the playoffs. Like, he was hurt, as I called it. Like you weren't getting 100% LeBron in this postseason run.
The fact that he played was insane.
Exactly.
They told him he needed surgery, but, it's LeBron, right? So, I think insurance-wise, you probably would like some wing defense. Some more ball handling at the point guard spot. Now, again, this is heavily dependent on if you can get a guy like Dennis Schroeder back. If you can get him back, or some of the other names that I'll talk about in the free agent market, that kind of solves your issue of ball handling. Austin Reeves obviously is their main ball handler along with LeBron James. But, if things don't work out in that end, I think you need at least one ball handler on the court. I think the big picture need for the Los Angeles Lakers to finish this off is figuring out what to do post LeBron, because it's very quickly coming up. LeBron James essentially, I think, likely has one more season with the Lakers. Now, if Bronny does the 2 years in college, maybe LeBron will come back for another season with the Lakers.
I doubt it.
But either way, LeBron James will not be a member of the Los Angeles Lakers for much longer. And the question really becomes what you want to do post LeBron. Anthony Davis, I don't think is that guy that you want to keep without LeBron. I think Anthony Davis, people talk about him as a top 15 player in the league. Now, on his healthy days, yeah, he is.
Absolutely.
But he's also gotten the benefit of playing next to LeBron freaking James. And I think when you see LeBron go and lead the team, especially even in his age that he is right now, I think you'll see a very different Anthony Davis. So I think it's a huge task for Rob Pelinka and Genie Buss in terms of what they want to do post LeBron.
Well, this has always been the problem with the Lakers. Like, they always just focus on the right now. Okay, what can we do? What can we, like, scramble, put together? But they never really have a long-term plan, which has always been my pet peeve with franchises like the Lakers, where they always try to buy a team, and it's not healthy. It's not sustainable, and it's not something that you can use long term.
I mean, to be fair to the Lakers, it has worked for them for
Well,
like their
because
whole
they're in LA.
franchise.
They're LA. Like, that's why it works. It's just because they're LA. If they were any other team, if they were like, I don't know, freaking like what are we talking about, like Milwaukee or something like that, like it wouldn't work. So,
Yeah, I mean, well, that's what the conversation is, right? What do you do after LeBron James? In terms of the draft, they do have the 17th pick. They also have the 47th pick. But 17th pick is very interesting that they do have a okay-ish enough pick in the first round this year, which will probably be packaged for something.
They could, yeah.
And there are a ton of options out there in terms of their potential moves. Obviously, as I said, first priority is signing Austin Reeves and then trying to get back probably Dennis Schroeder. Maybe he commands the full mid-level, and that's why you can pay him. Rui Hachimura, I think, will be very tough to get back, but I mean, you might as well try to get him back. Jared Vanderbilt, I think picking his option up is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It's not like he's making that much money. Granted, his offensive capabilities are not great, but he does what he's asked to do on the court.
You need young guys, and he's a young guy, and he can still grow a little bit. But I think on the defensive end, for sure, he brings a lot of value.
Now, in terms of the interesting names, obviously, this is the Los Angeles Lakers we're talking about, so they're obviously going to always be linked to very big names. Starting off with Fred VanVleet, he is on a player option, so there has been a number of conversations in terms of what he's going to do this season. Nick Nurse is now in Philadelphia, so he could ask for a trade there, but he has been also linked to the Los Angeles Lakers, as I mentioned. That 17th pick could be packaged, and I don't think the Raptors would have much use for a 17th pick, but a 3-team trade or something to that degree. Fred VanVleet, I think, would fit decently well with the Los Angeles Lakers. He'll bring you that shooting, he'll bring you that ball handling, and I think for him it's just about getting a bit healthier. This season, unfortunately for him, his knees were really shot for like the first half of the season, and he really struggled as a result.
He was also carrying a really big load for the Raptors as well, so that also played into the fact that role for him. But I think, Fred would be pretty good in LA. I think him playing off of LeBron likes playing with smart players, and I think Fred is a very smart guy. Him and AD would do really well in the pick and roll together, I think. So I don't dislike that option for Fred, but I just don't know if the Lakers have enough to pay him.
Yeah. I mean, Fred played really well with Jakob in the pick and roll, so he clearly showed he can play that role.
Put him with Anthony Davis?
Exactly.
Like, that would be insane.
Now, the biggest headline from today, Chris Paul being waived by the Phoenix Suns. Now, we called it I think we did it last episode.
Yeah.
Where he was probably going to get waived or traded.
Waived or traded, yeah, it was going to happen.
And he ended up getting waived by the Phoenix Suns. I think the first option for him that everyone's going to think of is, another banana boat crew with LeBron. Another banana boat member with LeBron James.
Two things. One, Ishbia is one cold SOB, yo. This guy didn't even wait. Like, he hired his coach. He's like, he let go. He fired Monty, got his guy. He's like, CP, you out of here too. I'm like,
he told James Jones, I'm running things now, man.
I'm running things, bro. Ishbia's like, I'm a fork out 15 mil just for you not to play on my team.
I mean, he's the new Mark Cuban, essentially.
Basically. And listen, man, I think it makes sense for the Suns because Chris Paul is clearly washed. But I think if anyone can rejuvenate him, first off, Chris Paul's a pretty petty guy, so he probably will take this and be like, all right, screw you then. And he'll join the Lakers just because of it. And second of all, my first reaction was, LeBron's picking him up. LeBron loves his guys, and he's picking him up.
And again, Chris Paul doesn't have the expectation of playing to that $40 million deal anymore. So he can take whatever the LA Lakers are going to give him.
Well, he just got a free 15.
And play on a reserve role, So, he's not expected to come in and play 30 minutes a night anymore. He can play that, 15, 20-minute role if he needs to.
But how good will Chris Paul be with the Lakers? That's the question mark. He'll be 39. I don't know how good he will be, but I think Chris Paul in a backup role and Chris Paul in the playoffs, I think still has some level
I
of
mean,
value.
he's been pretty solid still, even last season when he's been on
Just
the
health.
court. It's just the health,
Yeah.
obviously. Another big name, Kyrie Irving. Now, there has been a number of headlines quickly with Kyrie Irving reportedly wanting LeBron in Dallas. I don't think that's going to happen.
But imagine.
But, I mean, maybe it's clutch also putting in to the media
Absolutely.
that they want Kyrie on the Lakers. I don't think it's really going to happen because I don't see how. But if anybody does it, it's probably the Los Angeles Lakers. Another name that I think is being interestingly mentioned, sparingly, but still mentioned nonetheless, is DeJounte Murray. Now, he does have one more year, so it would have to be a trade. But as I mentioned, the Lakers do have the 17th pick that could be decently valuable in a trade package that would involve a number of teams. DeJounte Murray on the Lakers would be an interesting option, especially moving forward post LeBron. You know, he's not as young as he once was, but he is still a younger player.
What is he, like 27, 28?
Yeah, I mean, and if you decide to actually re-sign Anthony Davis for a couple more years, DeJounte Murray and Anthony Davis would not be a bad pairing. He also helps out, especially on the defensive end, but he's turned himself into a really good offensive player now as well. So he does really help you in terms of your championship aspirations and even post LeBron in terms of, you know, staying competitive. So I think that's a pretty interesting name. And then to fill out the rest of the names that I have over here, Dylan Brooks, that would be a very funny, but also a very LeBron thing to do.
That would be hilarious.
I think it would probably be a prove-it deal. He definitely wanted a $20 million deal before this past half season, especially the playoffs where he really struggled. I think he just, you know, in terms of him, I think the main thing for him is like rehabilitating his image around the league and trying to get back to that okay enough offensive production where he doesn't become a liability on the court. So I think Dylan Brooks is an interesting name. Mason Plumlee, Hani mentioned, we've essentially named him for like every damn team. He fits on every team. Torrey Craig, he's been okay in his career. He provides you a little bit of defense, occasional three-point shooting. Not a bad depth option. Isaiah Jackson, I really like him. He's not a huge name, and he'll play like maybe like 10 minutes. But he's a good center to have nonetheless, a good big man. Now, he is on team option. I think that would probably be picked up by the Indiana Pacers. But if not, he is a good depth piece, similar to what kind of Wenyen Gabriel played with the Los Angeles Lakers. Wenyen Gabriel is another name. He played decently well for the Los Angeles Lakers. I think they could bring him back. And Damian Lee. In terms of shooting, if you need shooting, Damian Lee can be a shooter. You know, he won a couple of rings with the Golden State Warriors. So, I mean, you know, good depth piece again. But overall, I think the Los Angeles Lakers, similar to the Boston Celtics, are in a very interesting position going into this offseason. And they have a lot of, I think, long-term questions. Not necessarily short-term. I think they are what they are in the short term. But I think both teams especially have a lot of long-term questions.
Yeah, I think, both teams, I think, are in a very interesting spot, respectively. But we'll see what happens with both the Lakers and the Celtics moving forward. Bringing us finally into a very newsworthy up and under segment for this week. A lot of coaches-related stuff, a lot of stuff in the front office, as expected for this time of year. But this year in particular has been pretty exciting. So, first off, are you up or under on Frank Vogel agreeing to become the next coach of the Phoenix Suns? He is signing a 5-year, $31 million contract.
I'm gonna say like I'm in the middle on this. Like I'm not opposed to Frank Vogel being a head coach. You know, he has championship experience, but was he the best guy that you could have gotten?
Nope.
I don't know. He'll come in. He'll do great work on the defensive end, but again, the problem has always been his offense. I mentioned this in the clip that we had on our IG and on our YouTube, so check those out if you haven't already. But I think essentially what this hire signals to me is that they're going to revamp their defense and then essentially leave it up to Devin Booker and KD to kind of figure things out on the offensive end.
I mean, it's basically the formula the 2020 Lakers kind of used. Was to just let LeBron and AD kind of cook on the offensive end and then just shore up the defense. Which, again, it worked in 2020. I I just think Frank Vogel's an okay coach. I just don't think he's this spectacular coach. I think if you're comparing him to guys like Nick Nurse, and obviously
Budenholzer's still on the
even
market.
Budenholzer, like I thought Budenholzer was a better candidate. Kenny Atkinson, even Kevin Young, who's now the highest paid assistant, I think would have been a better choice in my opinion. But based on all the reports, it was between Frank Vogel and Doc Rivers, and I think they made the right choice in that matter. That's just kind of what I think it came down to. But yeah, I think it's an okay move, but I just don't see it like I don't see it as an upgrade over Monty. I just don't. But we'll see what happens with the Phoenix Suns.
Next up, are you up or under on Adrian Griffin becoming the new head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks?
Hella up. Shout out to Griff, yo. Man deserves it. He's been a very nice, likable guy. Again, check out the clip that I made about Adrian Griffin getting the job. But again, great hire. I think he's a he's a player's guy. He a great guy on the defensive end. He's earned his stripes, and more importantly, Giannis approves. And that's the biggest thing. If Giannis, you get the buy-in from Giannis, everyone else will kind of fall in line. And I think this is a great hire from the Bucks because it gives you some new future, new energy, and plus, again, Griffin has been a part of the Raptors setup as well, so he'll definitely help them on the defensive end. So very happy with that hire. Next up, are you up or under on Monty Williams becoming the highest paid coach in NBA history, signing a 6-year, $78.5 million deal to become the next head coach of the Detroit Pistons?
Which can go all the way up to 100 mil, apparently.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm up on it.
Secure the bag, Monty.
Bro, this guy got NBA player type of money, which is insane. But, I mean, I understand it from the Pistons' perspective. They are in really win now kind of in the rebuild sense. They have their star of the future. They have a number of young players. It's really about developing that culture moving forward and taking that next step now. And Monty Williams is that guy to do it. Now, in terms of him winning a championship, he's probably not that guy. But he is that guy to kind of take your culture to that next step. With Dwayne Casey in the front office now, I think the Pistons now have a solid foundation moving forward. It's about whether or not they can execute on that foundation. But I think Monty Williams is a great coach and a great candidate for leading that next step to the future.
Yeah, I think Monty was a solid hire. I think he's gonna bring that winning culture, and I think now that he's in a less pressure environment in Detroit, I think you'll see some good things in Detroit.
Yeah. Next up, are you up or under on Nick Nurse becoming the new head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers?
I got mixed emotions. I really, really do because we've had some bad blood with Philly in the past, and I'll say this. Okay, I'm up on it from the standpoint that he's an upgrade over Doc Rivers. I would have said it for anybody. For anybody coming in, they're an upgrade over Doc Rivers. Well, maybe not anybody, but yeah, Nick Nurse. I think from a tactics perspective, is going to be able to make Philly a better team. I think the struggle will come. How healthy will Joel Embiid be, and will Joel be able to play the Nick Nurse style? Because Nick Nurse's style is I'm gonna play my guys heavy if needed, and he's not. He's basically not gonna tolerate if you're not putting out your best effort. He will not be afraid to bench you. He will not be afraid to shove you aside and put in favor of other players that are producing for him. So I don't know if that's the personalities are gonna mesh well together, but I think for Philadelphia. For the Sixers and their fan base, I think this is a great hire for them.
I mean, from a purely basketball standpoint, this is a very, very good hire for them.
It also changes if James Harden also stays.
Yeah.
I think that plays a role as well, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, Nurse to Philly. I mean, shit, man, we gotta see him 4 times a year, man. Just boxing one on Pascal.
This is gonna be, I think, a worse version of Dwayne Casey, man.
It's absolutely gonna be the worst version of Casey curse. Get rid of one curse and start another one. Yeah. That's just how it works. And finally, are you up or under on Golden State Warriors president and GM Bob Myers steps down from his position? Now, obviously, his contract expired. He was negotiating a new deal, but he decided, I'm going to step away.
I mean, I'm under on it if I'm a Golden State fan. But, I mean, generally, I'm up on it. Obviously, I think like he's been there for a while. I think even like Nick Nurse, I think had a similar statement where at some point in time you kind of need a reset button. I think the main thing though is that Bob Myers knew that Golden State's in a bad position in the next couple of years. So I think he was just like, yo, let me just get out of the good situation I'm in and just chill.
Went
And
out on a
apparently he
high.
might get paid by ESPN. So I mean, hey, if he's gonna get a pay raise and he doesn't have to deal with the stress of, NBA life, I mean, good for him, man.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about it that Bob Myers will get another job, whether it be in media, whether it be in an NBA front office, he will absolutely get another job. I just think, yeah, like you mentioned, he probably just it just became eventually it just became his time to move on, and we'll see what happens. We'll see who Golden State hires. It'll most likely, all reports are saying it's going to be someone from within is going to probably take over, which makes sense for Golden State. But we'll see what happens, especially with them having a lot more decisions coming
I
up.
mean, interestingly, Steve Kerr's being named as Greg Popovich's successor in San Antonio,
I
so
mean,
that would be interesting.
he was a Bob Myers guy, so who knows? We'll see what happens though. But with that, that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course on YouTube or wherever you can find a podcast. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss more great content from us in the future. Also, follow our social media, Twitter and Instagram at _N_podcast, where, our Instagram and our YouTube account, we really post a lot of clips of breaking news. So definitely stay tuned for that and keep an eye out for those as well. And also check out our website, upandunderpodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. It's a place where we write blog posts with every single episode. So if you don't have time to listen or watch the full thing, you can read about it on our website. Definitely check that out if you haven't done so. And yeah, man, the NBA Finals is still ongoing. Hopefully we get a long series. I'm kind of hoping around 6 games is what I'm kind of hoping for. But I'm honestly, this is probably the first finals in a while where I'll be happy if either team wins.
Yeah.
I think
I do want Denver to win.
I want Denver to win, but I think I wouldn't be so happy. I wouldn't be disappointed if Jimmy gets his first ring and Kyle Lowry gets his second. So, yeah, it's a very exciting finals, a very exciting time, and obviously offseason and the draft are coming up as well. So stay tuned for more content from us in the future about those. But with that, that concludes this episode. We'll see you guys all in the next one. Take it easy.